When I was in opposition, and I was in opposition a long, long time, about nearly 8 years, I used to attend, as I still do, the Festival of Ideas, which I just love. I just thought it was fantastic to bring public intellectuals of renown from around the world and around Australia, as well as locals, who'd come and give us ideas. And it was after going to a Festival of Ideas in Adelaide that I thought, these fantastic people come here for 3 days. Wouldn't it be great if we could get them here for 3 months to actually work with us on some of the big problems facing Australia and our own state, but also not just problems, about opportunities and how we could seize those opportunities and make the most of them. So what happened is that I was talking to someone about a program of artists in residence, and then I thought, what about thinkers in residence? And we sort of talked about it. A number of people didn't like the idea, in the sense they said the public and the media and the opposition, the other side of politics, won't like the idea of people coming here to think. But of course, every thinker in residence that's come to Adelaide has said the one thing they don't really get much of a chance to do is think, because they're so busy. So what we did is I talked to a few people. I talked to Professor Ingrid Day, who's now a Deputy Vice-Chancellor in New Zealand at Massey University. I spoke with Mary O'Kane, who was then the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Adelaide, and she was so enthusiastic about it. She said, this is just a great idea, and you should announce that you're going to do it. So we did. We gave the idea to the Adelaide Advertiser, and we sort of talked about some of the kinds of people that might come. And we mentioned people like David Attenborough or others, and they gave it a terrific splash and actually supported the idea. So we sort of locked it in. And I think the great thing about the program is that there wasn't a selection committee. It wasn't overly bureaucratic. What I asked people to do was, like, where are our problems and where are our challenges and opportunities, and who's out there? So we wanted to make sure that we were not subsidising things that were going to happen anyway. And we're not going to pick up all of the costs. There has to be, for it to work, it can't just be my program or the government's program. There had to be a partnership. So that's where we came up with the idea of project partners, to actually have partners who'd also contribute to paying the costs of a thinker that they really wanted. We thought that if they had to share the costs, they would value it more. And I think that was a very important part of the program. The other thing is that we didn't really, people said, aren't you going to establish a board? Isn't there going to be a selection process? I thought that would end up being overly bureaucratic. So what we did is, to universities, to business, to the environmental movement and others, and obviously to ministers, we talked about, okay, give me some names and also look at the areas that we most need help in. The area of rough sleeping homelessness was something that we identified through our social inclusion initiative as being a tough nut to crack. What we were seeing is people who were sleeping rough in the parklands, having the most terrible things happen to them, and then when they got sick or when they were assaulted or abused, go to hospital and then be fixed up physically, but none of the reasons for their homelessness and their situation really being tackled. And it was out of talking to David Capo, who met this fabulous woman in New York, Roseanne Haggerty, who was doing that project in New York City in a really tough environment and was being celebrated around the United States for doing things differently, not just giving people a roof over their heads, but giving them the supports that they need in each of the buildings, giving them permanency, giving them a home, giving them the supports, but so that they could actually take the step up and re-engage in education or employment. So we asked Roseanne to come to South Australia as our thinker in residence. She came to Cabinet. She came to Cabinet and won us over. She had public lectures. She dealt with the various agencies and volunteer organisations, and as a result we not only set up Common Ground here in Adelaide and have funded with millions of dollars of government backing, but with the support of the community sector, with the support of business. So it's been happening in Adelaide, but it's now gone national, and so Common Ground is now in other states. And here's an example of a thinker in residence who came here not just to think but to do, who actually persuaded us that there was a different way of tackling some of the hardest, most protracted social problems. And it's not only worked here and is working here, but it's now being taken up nationally. I met with Susan Greenfield in the Agent General's office in London, and it didn't take long for Susan to convince me that we had to rethink the way we did science education, that we had to work to lift the scientific literacy of our community, because so many of the issues that we face in Australia, whether it's climate change or GM foods, or whether it's dealing with issues such as stem cell research or nuclear power, require not only politicians with a better understanding of science, but also a community and a media that were more scientifically literate. And I have to say, it was an exhausting 30 minutes with Susan. I said afterwards I felt like I needed a cup of tea and a lie down, but I instantly said she is going to hit us like a hurricane, and she did. And as a result of her residency, a whole series of projects were spun out. I mean, the Australian Science Media Centre, which of course has 3,000 scientists on a database that it can be linked to many, many hundreds of media organisations and journalists, that the Australian Science Media Centre means that we can connect journalists with the best expert in Australia, or the best experts in Australia in a particular field of science. It's been embraced by the media, it's been embraced by the scientific community, it's been embraced by business. And of course also setting up the Royal Institution here in Adelaide, the first satellite of the Royal Institution in London, in terms of publicising science and pushing education in science. It's been established in our old stock exchange building, and Susan and I even went around looking at buildings, and we purchased one, we backed it in with about $13 million worth of money, and then the federal government, Kevin Rudd, put in $15 million, and so did businesses put in money. So we've got out of that residency from Susan Greenfield a series of projects, including two that have absolutely also gone national and are making a real difference. South Australia, as I've said on many occasions, has got 54% of Australia's wind power. We've got more wind power in our state than all of the other states and territories put together. I mean, 21% of our power now comes from renewable energy, and so we've reached the federal government's target 9 years ahead of schedule. Now, at a time of really strong economic and employment growth, probably the best economic circumstances the state has seen, we've seen the strongest drop in emissions in mainland Australia. And we've had a number of thinkers in this area. Herbert Girardet, who talked about reducing our footprint in terms of our environmental footprint, the damage that we do to our environment. And he really pushed me and us on this. Stephen Schneider, who shared the Nobel Prize on terms of climate change with Al Gore and others, he came here, and out of his residency came our landmark in Australia, in fact only the third in the world, legislation in terms of climate change, including entering into voluntary agreements with industry sectors, regions, universities, churches, in order to reduce emissions. So there's absolutely no doubt that the thinkers in residence in this area had a profound impact on me. So much so that I appointed myself Australia's first and apparently the world's first climate change minister. And we're now regarded as an exemplar internationally in terms of tackling climate change and in terms of embracing renewable energy. The thinkers played a major role in this, and that's another example. We didn't need to back it in with millions of dollars, but we've had billions of dollars of investment into our state because of our leadership and our first mover position on climate change and renewables. Laura Lee is another person who had a major influence as a thinker, and that influence, I think, is going to endure for many, many years ahead. I mean, Laura, we met her through our Carnegie Mellon connection. We'd invited Carnegie Mellon to set up its first Australian campus here in Adelaide, and she attended one of the functions, and it was soon clear to us that she had an international reputation, not just as head of architecture at Carnegie Mellon, which is one of the top architecture schools in the United States, but also as someone who had a different way of looking at design thinking, not just design of buildings but the spaces between, but also encouraging a design culture in industry and in the community, and also a different way of approaching planning. This attracted me because for years in South Australia we've had this sort of development debate where we've had developers versus environmentalists and heritage lobby. And the problem is that there was this sort of dichotomy. Rather than actually thinking about, okay, how do we create new heritage that we'll be proud of for the future and that the next generations are proud of, just as the heritage lobby here are proud of our Victorian buildings from the 19th century. So it was really an embrace of new heritage and of excellence in design. And Laura came here and brought these people together, whether it's the Property Council or the Urban Development Institute or ministers. I mean, one of the things she said to us, said to ministers, was that there's some fantastic things happening with this big expansion in infrastructure, a five-fold increase in infrastructure. In fact, there's probably about $80 billion worth of projects on the books. But it was being done very much in an ad hoc way, that a minister would come in with a particular project for a building, another minister would come in for another building, and she said, you know, you're a fairly small CBD area, but there are people who are working on Riverbank who aren't connected to people working on Victoria Square or working on North Terrace, and this doesn't make any sense. So the key thing was that she got ministers on side and then got people out in her partnerships on side for a different way of doing things. And as a result, we've set up the Integrated Design Commission, which is currently, for instance, looking at the master planning of our cultural precinct that goes from the Clipsal site down at Bowden Brompton, which is going to be an incredibly innovative sort of urban village, but going all the way through the new hospital, the new Health and Medical Research Centre, hopefully a major revamp of the Adelaide Festival Centre, of course the $500 million redevelopment of Adelaide Oval, the expansion of the Convention Centre, then going all the way up to what will happen on the old Royal Adelaide Hospital site. What will happen there? Will we expand the botanical gardens? We've got to preserve some of the beautiful heritage-listed buildings there. What use will we be able to use them for? Will it be universities or for museums or art galleries? Or could we also perhaps contemplate a world-class, world-renowned building that would help define our city on that site? For instance, a museum of Aboriginal art, or a museum that brings together the fantastic collection at the South Australian Museum, but also of artefacts, which is the best in the world and the richest in the world, but plus the contemporary art, the magnificent contemporary art collection held by the art gallery, perhaps in a fantastic building that represents, Aboriginals' people's love of the land, but also the sky, something that might be glass, where the artworks could be seen not just by visitors, but from the streetscapes or even from planes passing overhead. And so I think we've got a real opportunity through a process that Laura Lee established to transform Adelaide and do it in a much better, classier, more coordinated way. And she was another thinker who made a real difference. And I could see in meetings with her the penny dropping with people who said there's a different and better way of doing this. And what we've seen is old enemies become new allies. I went to Portland, Oregon on the advice of John Hill to have a look at their tram network. And when I met Fred, what he explained to me, it wasn't just about better public transport, but it was also about the economic and social and creative regeneration that comes about through better public transport. And so it was about the reinvigoration, the revitalisation of Portland, Oregon. So we talked about our plans based on what Fred had shown me. We invited him down to become a thinker in residence. And of course, very much the tram development, the extension of the tram going west is very much a legacy of his and the Thinkers in Residence program. People said to us, why don't you take the tram up to North Adelaide and past the Adelaide Oval, or take it east to Norwood? But what Fred said to me and to Cabinet was that if you want this to be a major economic development tool, take it west, take it to areas which need refurbishment, that need reinvestment. Because what they found in Portland is that within 2 blocks of the tram, everywhere the tram went, there was regeneration worth billions of dollars. So that's why we decided, and of course this fits in with what we're doing with transport-oriented developments. We're taking it west through the city, and then of course down to Hindmarsh and to the entertainment centre precinct, but obviously with to be linked into the Bowden development, then down to Port Adelaide eventually, Semaphore, West Lakes, and of course what I want to see is a city loop as well. So he convinced us of the power of fantastic, decent public transport to actually regenerate a city by taking it to more degraded parts of our city rather than to parts that have already have been regenerated. So Fred Hanson's made a powerful difference to us in our thinking on public transport, whether it's the electrified railway network or, of course, the trams. Peter Cullen, the late Peter Cullen, an expert on water, an expert on the River Murray. It was fantastic to have Peter Cullen working with us, coming to Cabinet, working with our water experts here before the drought set in, because we were able to take an intellectual leadership position in the national debates over the rescue of the River Murray because of the work that Peter Cullen had done before the drought started. So again, here's an example of a thinker in residence who was homegrown Australian, who came here and gave us the intellectual firepower to lead the debate on the River Murray, to put the river's interests first and to put the national interests first, which was by making sure that all of the river was healthy, not just parts of it. We've got a major resources boom happening here in South Australia, but all of us are concerned about a two-speed economy where we see huge investment in resources and in infrastructure, but we see greater pressure on manufacturing, particularly because of the high price of the Australian dollar, but also competition from China and other Asian countries. So we've embraced, with the strong support of the business community, bringing Joran Roos here, a world expert on innovation in manufacturing, and he's working with about 10 companies but in order to look at their practices and how they can take the step up, either step up locally, nationally, or onto the world stage. The feedback from his residency has been astonishing. I'm getting it from other states, from the federal government, from the highest levels of the business community. And so whilst what he's saying is very challenging, it's being embraced as an urgent need. And I think this is another area where we can show intellectual leadership nationally because of the work of a thinker in residence in Joran Roos. I'm currently using Joran's work to help me in our negotiations with BHP Billiton for the $30 billion expansion of the giant Olympic Dam resource, which is worth over $1 trillion. It'll be the world's biggest mine. But what we want to make sure is that we maximise the amount of work being done here in South Australia, the amount of processing being done here in South Australia rather than in Asia, and also, very importantly, how we maximise the benefits for local companies, local industries, local manufacturers. So here's an example where Joran's work is helping me in my negotiations to secure the world's biggest mine, but with benefits for manufacturing. Some of my colleagues, when we started the Thinkers in Residence program, really sort of questioned what value it would have. I mean, was it going to be sort of an airy-fairy approach to issues? Was there going to be something solid coming out of it? And so I think that there was a little bit of, not unease, but maybe a little bit of bemusement about the process. But one of the things that's been critical to the process is that not only the project partners, but also the fact that the thinkers all do public lectures. And the turnout to those public lectures has been simply extraordinary. In fact, on a number of occasions we've seen well over 1,000 people. So there's a real thirst for the work of public intellectuals. People actually want us to lift our sights, and they want people who act as, in a sense, I always say that some of the thinkers have come here and not only given us good ideas, but have helped us have the confidence to push with things that we already knew and push much harder. They pour a bit of petrol on the fire along the way. But coming to Cabinet was a really different idea, and one by one the thinkers came to Cabinet and often were scheduled to come in for 20 minutes but stayed sometimes for more than an hour because Cabinet ministers wanted the dialogue and wanted their help. They gave us independent advice rather than relying on the public service, and I'm a great fan of our public service. It was another form of independent advice, not a consultant that you pay to sometimes tell you what you already know or to make you feel comfortable, but thinkers who have their own reputation, who could come into a Cabinet room, mix it and match us and provoke us and inspire us. And that's exactly what happened. That has been one of the great things about the program, that each of the thinkers has had access directly to me, directly to ministers, and directly to Cabinet in the Cabinet room, as well as to the heads of the public service. And in a sense, it's completed by their public lectures, as well as, of course, their recommendations that we make public. So it's thinkers in residence, not just for us, but for the entire community. And it's all been about how we as a community here in South Australia can become a leader again rather than a follower. And if you think about the 1970s, I came to Adelaide to work for Don Dunstan. Why? Because during the Fraser years, as Clive Jenkins, the British trade union leader, said, South Australia was a beacon light in the night of Australian ignorance. And in so many areas, particularly in social policy, South Australia in the 1970s was a leader, and we liked being a leader. But various things happened over the years, and we wanted to, it seemed like we were a community that was prepared to settle for second best, that we were prepared to, to say, oh, look, the bigger things happen in the bigger states. So really the thinkers in residence have helped give us confidence. They've given us the intellectual firepower to be a much more confident, forward-looking state who now has shaken off a cringe about it being better somewhere else. And in so many areas where the thinkers have worked with us, whether it's in social inclusion or whether it's in renewable energy or climate change or design, we are now national leaders and in some cases international leaders. One of the great things about the program is that while the thinkers come here for 3 months, they've really signed up for life. And they all sort of joke about this. They've become our ambassadors at large. And we're now still contacting them all the time, and they're still helping us. And now other states are approaching them, not just other states in Australia, but other states and nations internationally. So the program has been very much admired around the world. And I think that it would be very important for us to continue, because I'm convinced that we'll see thinkers in residence programs, perhaps with different names, established all around the world. It's interesting, some of the innovations. The Australian Science Media Centre has now been replicated in New Zealand, Japan, Canada, a whole range of nations around the world, including in the Middle East, want to set up science media centres based on the Australian model, and that came out of a Thinker in Residence. So I think that the Thinkers in Residence program has made a profound impact on our state, has made us more outward looking, more forward looking, but it's also having collateral positive impact nationally and internationally. Look, I'm confident that the program will continue here in South Australia. It would be a really dumb decision to end a program that's had such a positive result in seeing changes to legislation, changes in programs, and backed by hundreds of millions of dollars of investment, including attracting investment from the Commonwealth in our projects, whether it's the Royal Institution or integrated design or in so many other areas. So I think that we should never ever be afraid of having our ideas challenged. It's really important for premiers and ministers to be educated. Don Dunstan used to say to me, always make sure that your most dearly held assumptions are regularly challenged. And that's exactly what's happened with this program here. I think we need to shake off this city of churches mantra and be really a city of ideas. We're known as the festival city, we're known as the wine state, we also want to be the mind state. Jeff Mulgan, one of our thinkers in residence, who advised us on social policy, and we've got the Centre for Social Innovation set up here in Adelaide, but doing national work. He said South Australia has to once again be the place where the future starts. The Thinkers in Residence program has helped us reclaim that leadership that we had in the past, but we lost confidence as a result.